Florida State, we just had their preview, just posted a couple days ago, talking about what this team's going to look like. And look, they're really good at a lot of positions. Okay. They're really good at the offensive line. Okay. They have a quarterback that can, manage an offense. Their running back room is really good. Offensively, their wide receiver room is very questionable, right? It's very, very questionable. However, if there has been a weakness of this Georgia Tech team these past couple of years, right, it has to have been that front seven, right, in their run defense. Right? They were pretty abysmal last year. And when I say abysmal, okay, I mean like they were terrible against the run. Teams ran the ball against them 57% of the time because they could. And that wasn't just necessarily game script stuff because Georgia Tech's offense was really good. Like you had to score to beat Georgia Tech because their offense was moving at times with Haynes King there at quarterback.
Mhm.
But they were 123rd, right, in the country. So there were only 9 teams that got ran on more than Georgia Tech. And I'll tell you this, most of those teams are really terrible teams. And the reason being, and the reason why teams were running the ball so much on them was because of game script. It wasn't because they couldn't run on those teams necessarily. They could, a lot of those teams, because they weren't very good. But this Georgia Tech team was horrendous against the run last year. And, you added a guy like Thomas Gore on the interior. You added Jordan Vandenberg and on the interior as well in the transport. Like, it was very clear that was a need, but you also lose some guys in that front seven, specifically like Kyle Kennard, who, I don't know that necessarily he was a huge factor in the run game. Daquan Dallas, I feel like, was a little bit more involved in that. But they're both gone. So you're going to need to see vast improvement from some of these guys, right? Like Zeke Biggers, Matthew Scott. Like, you're going to need to see immense improvement from these guys because I think Florida State is going to try to establish the run, and I don't think they're going to want to stop with this group of running backs here.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't have. Norvell knows better than to not. And listen, I do think the key matchup I'm watching for here is the offensive line of Florida State and the defensive line and the front seven of Georgia Tech. You hit on it. Absolutely. That run game. Look around that Florida State offense, but you see a ton of stars. You see even talent behind that with TJ Ferguson. It it's a line you feel good about traveling across the ocean with because running game and defense that those typically travel. And if you can do that early in the season, first of all, tackling, especially we know how good Roydell Williams is at breaking tackles. It's going to be something to watch and something if Georgia Tech can stay in this game long enough, it's going to be because they can stop the run on early downs early in this football game. And then, who knows if Georgia Tech's an explosive football team, a dangerous football team. This gets to the second half, especially the fourth quarter. Who knows? And obviously, DJ, you listen. I hope he does well, and I feel like he is doing better with Norvell. And we talked about it just yesterday, or I guess a couple days ago when you guys are watching this. But he is who he is, right? He kind of is who he is, and we've seen enough about him to kind of make our judgment. And listen, he's a he's a plus quarterback in college football. He's not going to be a game changer type, week in and week out. Not expecting some crazy jump. If he does have it, beauty, and that's great for Florida State, obviously. But especially in week 0, I don't think too much is going to be asked of him. And so you get to the fourth quarter, and it's a football game. It's going to be up to him, and maybe an inexperienced and maybe not a crazy separating group at wide receiver, and that's going to be something I think you've got Amari Harvey, you've got Lamar Daniels, Clayton Powell-Lee, Miles Brooks. These are all players in that secondary. Zachary Tobe comes in, all players in the secondary for Georgia Tech that I feel pretty good about. And if you can have these matchups where it's third and long, you can start talking about letting Romello Height, letting Kevin Harris really get after the passer. So it'll be interesting. To me, that's where I'm looking at. Early down, they first and second quarter. How are we seeing Georgia Tech hold up against the run? I think it's going to tell us a lot about not only the rest of the game, but also, there's maybe the season for Georgia Tech in terms of they have a tough schedule. You got to be able to stop the run if you want to have a chance to win the games. First of all, you're supposed to win, and also have a chance at some upsets against some damn talented teams.
Yeah, and I thought Georgia Tech had a rather explosive offense. Um, and I think they kind of relied on some big plays, down the stretch. I don't think you're going to be necessarily able to have those kind of explosive plays against these lockdown corners for Florida State, Central Cypress, and AZ Thomas. I know the defensive line, takes a huge drop off. I mean, Florida State finished top 10 in sacks per game with
Oh
that
yeah.
defensive line there. Jared Verse was unbelievable. Braden Fisk obviously was another NFL player there on the interior, but they still have some pieces there on the defensive line where, I think they can match up with Georgia Tech's offensive line, which is good. We talked about it. It's a good offensive line, and Brent Keys, we know what he's going to do with offensive lines. We know he's going to recruit there. We know he's going to develop there. It may just take a couple more years for him to get his offensive line to where he wants it to be, but it's going to be pretty decent. I I have a feeling here that, and it's week 0 and it's in Dublin, but I have a feeling that the talent on Florida State, and I know the Sharps are all over Georgia's Tech because Georgia Tech is a better football team than I think people think, right?
Yeah.
A way better football team. I think both you and I expressed that in our team previews. I do think this Florida State team has a chance to overwhelm this Georgia Tech team very early with the run game. If GJU just takes care of the football, I don't think he needs to do anything spectacular for them to win this game. I don't think he needs to do anything spectacular for them to win this game by double digits. I just think that
Yep.
this defense needs to stop the run, and those lockdown corners just got to stay healthy and on the field, right? And when that's going to happen, I don't think Georgia Tech's going to be able to have those explosive plays that they were able to take advantage of with guys like Eric Singletary um, on their off. I don't think they're going to be able to do that as much as they would like to. I think Haynes King is a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. So look, if I had to pick right now, I have to go Florida State minus 11.5. So I would take them to win the game, right? And on this show, when we do previews of games, we always take a spread, right? And we take who's going to win the game, right? Because those things can be different, right? Those things can be different. Like Georgia Tech can cover the spread, but also not win the football game. I'm going to take Florida State to win and cover the 11.5 here.
No, I see where you come from. I'm gonna take Florida State to win, obviously, and I'll go Georgia Tech to cover just because I think, 11.5 is a good amount. I do think, maybe a backdoor cover here and there might be in the cards for Georgia Tech. We know how Haynes King loves to do that. Um, Listen, yeah, I have a feeling that they're gonna be able to run the football on this defense line. You talked about those guys departing, and yes, there's some talent there, especially at the edge group rushing the passer. But this is a pretty good offensive line for Georgia Tech. They return a lot of guys. They feel really good about where it was not only last year, but where it is heading this year. They feel like the transfer Kalen Rutledge from Mid Tennessee State is going to be a guy that can be a physical run blocker. And if you can establish run, you can stay in this football game, I think, for a little bit longer than, maybe the double digit spread kind of assumes that you might. So I don't know. You mentioned that the matchup to watch too is also going to be Eric Singleton versus these corners, AZ Thomas and Central Cypress. How can he separate consistently? Can his scheme open other guys? Is it just going to be King zeroing in on Singleton? And if that's the case, I do wonder, if Florida State can get after King and cause some turnover because he's prone to do that. We've seen the high highs and we've seen sometimes the low lows with Haynes King. And that'll be something that can really break open this game, not only for Georgia Tech, I guess, staying in it, but also if you get some turnovers start mounting, some third and long, some quick 3-and-outs, whatever it may be, you can see Florida State start pulling away and potentially absolutely covering this spread. But yeah, I'll go Georgia Tech to cover. I just think it's going to be weird going to Dublin. I don't expect if I had to bet, which I'm not going to, I would just expect a closer game than you would potentially see here in the States, just because it's week 0, maybe missing tackles here and there, and also it's in Dublin, man. It's in Dublin.
Yeah, I don't think like I think this will be a good game. I just I have a feeling that Florida State has a better chance of pulling away than Georgia Tech has a chance of, really staying in this football game. Yeah, also in due part to Haynes King, right, being the gunslinging crazy guy that he is. Yeah, but I'm really excited for this football game. I'm glad that it's the opener of the college football season because I enjoy watching Brent Key's Georgia Tech teams, and
Yep.
I think this Florida State team will be able to see a lot and have some of our questions answered pretty early.
Yeah.
Specifically along that defensive line. and that wide receiver room, you're going to get to kind of see whether or not those guys in that room can really compete at the level that we want them to, right? And it's not like Georgia Tech's secondary is anything incredible. You have some good pieces there, but guys like Malik Benson, right, who you were waiting to step up at Alabama, wasn't necessarily a difference maker for them. Guys like Ja'Kai Douglas, Jalen Brown, is Hakeem Williams going to get a lot of snaps in this game? I think we're going to kind of get to see what maybe this wide receiver room can look like. And by the way, whatever happens in this first game, obviously isn't going to determine the outcome of the rest of the season for this wide receiver room. But it would be really interesting to see kind of what wide receivers are playing, who's in this rotation, and what they're actually sending out there and what they look like. So that I think is a question. Florida State's defensive line and wide receiver group are questions that I want answered for them coming out of this game, and it might not get answered, but we'll see. I'm excited for this football game.
Can I ask you real quick? What kind of coaching edge are we going to see here? Do we believe this Florida State staff, who's a pretty damn good staff, is significantly better than Georgia Tech? I happen to believe no. I think this Georgia Tech, especially at the coordinator and at coaching level, is a really good coaching staff. Buster Faulkner is a stud at offense coordinator. Tyler Santucci, has done some good things at Duke, done some good things at Texas A&M. He comes in as the new defensive coordinator this year after a pretty tough year last year on the defense side of the football. That's another intriguing factor, I think, to watch Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins for Florida State scheme up against maybe a new look defense for Santucci. And then on the same side, the other way, how does, Adam Fuller and that defensive staff at Florida State, how do they expect to see Brent Key and the explosiveness of Buster Faulkner's offense? What kind of edge are you seeing there?
Well, I think you're right. The Georgia Tech staff is fantastic. I think both of these staffs, and I'm not talking about Mike Norvell because people know who he is and appreciate his work, but I think people don't talk about like Alex Atkins, right? Or Buster Faulkner, like either of the offensive coordinators in this game, or Tyler Santucci or Adam Fuller. Like people don't talk about these guys. These are two of the better coaching staffs in the ACC. Do not be mistaken about that.
Yep.
So I don't see a significant edge for Florida State because I think Buster Faulkner last year probably did the best job of any offensive coordinator in the ACC last year at just finding ways to create for his offense. So I don't think there's necessarily a huge edge for either team. I think I would give slight lean for Mike Norvell and his staff top to bottom, but at the coordinator spot, I think it's pretty even. I think Brent Key has a very good staff in there, and it's reflected by the way that he's recruiting there as well right now.
Well, last year on Faulkner, last thing, they went from one of the worst offenses in the ACC to one of the best offenses, and hoping to just lag out right there. But it was crazy. It was kind of crazy to see. And Haynes King, he got the best out of him. We've seen a lot of Haynes King over the years at Texas A&M, and they brought him in. It's like, well, is he even got to win the job there at Georgia Tech? And he was one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. Like Brent Key likes to say, the best. I don't know about that, but regardless, it was a heck of a job last year, and I'm excited to see what these teams and these coaches can do, not only in week 0, but also for the rest of the season.